What is the first step in building a house? Build a foundation. Without a solid foundation, a house will be weak and unable to support the frame. This idea is pretty simple. A solid foundation leads to a more stable and well-built structure, while a weaker foundation will lead to a house that may sink, crack, or be unstable. One cannot rush the building of a foundation. It takes time. The same goes for reading and writing. When people think of reading a book, they usually think of reading the most exciting parts closer to the climax. When someone reads a book for the excitement, they usually skim the introduction hoping to reach the exciting parts, while in reality, the introduction is one of the most important parts of the book. These first few chapters provide a foundation for the rest of the story. When people think about what goes into writing an essay or any writing assignment, they usually think of an outline, the frame of an essay. An outline usually contains a few main points, a thesis, and maybe even a hook or conclusion. Using this outline, one can then write a solid essay. I used to think this was true until I realized this year that when you only write an outline or skim quickly through the beginning of a book, it is a lot like rushing through the construction of a foundation to build a frame. If a frame is built without first completing a strong foundation, the house is destined to crumble. This year, I learned that reading and writing are processes that require foundations of thought and time in order to properly read a story or write an essay. This year, my English teacher has given out a lot of writing assignments. He believed that our writing assignments were like a series of training runs, building to the end goal of running a marathon. Some of the first assignments he gave us were to reread and write a journal about several key chapters of our summer reading book, A Lesson Before Dying by Ernest Gaines. Chapter 29 was written in the perspective of Jefferson just a few days before he was sent to the electric chair. After rereading this section of the book, I gained an entirely new perspective on who Jefferson really was and how he was feeling in the days leading up to his execution. This was the point in the book where I gained a strong feeling of empathy toward Jefferson. I eventually used this idea in my essay on why reading matters. In my paper, I addressed how a person can gain empathy through reading. Even 2 months before I wrote my essay, I had already unknowingly laid a strong foundation. When I did write the essay, I had a solid foundation of pre-writing and ideas. Because I had a strong foundation, I knew how to approach the paper and felt confident about the work I put in. However, this is not the case for all my essays. One that stands out in my mind is my first semester final exam essay. Why did I do so poorly on this essay? I set a weak foundation. Although I did not know what the actual essay was going to be about, I still had many opportunities to lay a solid foundation. I knew the entirety of the essay was going to be based around an article by Nicholas Kristof titled Girls Just Want to Go to School. It was about a girl from Vietnam named Phung who on a daily basis overcomes extreme adversity just to get an education. She wakes up at 3 a.m. and rides 2 hours to school, rain or sunshine, on a daily basis. The article itself was only 2 pages long and would only take the average reader about 5 minutes to read it. Our responsibility was to be very familiar with the article by the time finals rolled around. In order to do this, my teacher assigned a series of pre-writing assignments, each pertaining to separate aspects of the article. Because it was getting closer and closer to finals week, I decided to put off these assignments until the last minute. There were 5 prompts in total, and we were expected to complete 1 or 2 a day the week before our final. Because I waited until the day before they were due, I was forced to hastily sprint through all 5 assignments in one day. Because I went through them so fast, I put very little effort into each individual prompt. By the time my English final rolled around, I was extremely unprepared. I scrambled to form an outline and build the framework of my essay without previously laying a solid foundation. I was constantly stopping to think about what I was going to write instead of just writing. It was apparent that because I laid such a weak foundation, I wrote a weak essay. I rushed. I know that if I had put in more time and effort into these pre-writing assignments, writing that final essay would have been much smoother and I would have gotten a much better grade because of it. This year, my English class read a book titled A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. The book was written in the mid-1800s, so naturally the majority of the class, including myself, had some difficulty reading it. In order to combat this language gap, we read the first few chapters aloud in class. This was the first time I read a book aloud in class since I was in junior high. My teacher chose to dedicate entire class periods to reading to be sure that the entire class had a solid foundation for the rest of the story. In addition to reading aloud, after each chapter my teacher would have us come up with questions we had about the book so far. The questions could be about important characters, events, the language of the book, or anything that could help us further understand where the story was leading. My teacher didn't assign any reading assignments for homework for the first week of reading to be sure everyone had a solid understanding of the first few chapters. By the time he actually assigned reading as homework, everyone had a solid foundation and was able to read the book with ease. So what does this have to do with building a house? The lesson I learned this year about reading and writing in my sophomore English class could be applied to building a house as well as all aspects of life. In my Intro to Business class, we looked at an example of two investors. One invested $20,000 at the age of 20, and the other investor invested $50,000 at the age of 40. By the time they were both 50, the investor who had started investing at 20 had a substantially larger return than the investor who started out at 40. The initial amount of the investment did not matter. The lesson learned by this is that the earlier you start something, the more you will get out of it in the future. When you think about it, everything you do in life takes time, such as developing a solid portfolio, building a house, or even starting a family. Like the process of reading and writing, with all of these things, it is important to start early, usually much earlier than expected. Perhaps the process of writing can teach us all a lesson about life. To be successful, everything takes time, and it all starts with a strong foundation.